you can translate spells written by witches hundreds of years ago, a library in Chicago has a job for you. 3 rare manuscripts with links to the occult can now be viewed online, courtesy of the Newberry Library. Experts think one of the manuscripts, called the Book of Magical Charms, was written by 2 anonymous witches in the 1600s. The book reportedly contains spells for how to cheat at dice, ease menstrual cramps, and communicate with spirits, along with more mainstream Latin prayers. Another text, called the Commonplace Book, discusses strange, unexplained occurrences and religious questions. The 3rd manuscript, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, was written by a Puritan minister involved in the Salem witch trials. The library has invited any citizen scholar with basic knowledge of English and Latin to translate and transcribe the works as part of its Religious Change exhibition opening September 14th.
CNN has reported that headscarf-wearing women now have an emoji of their own, thanks to a 16-year-old Saudi girl. Raouf Al-Humedi, who now lives in Vienna, proposed the idea last year to the Unicode Consortium, the nonprofit corporation that reviews and develops new emojis. And she's delighted that Apple accepted it. It was unveiled Monday on World Emoji Day as one of a collection of new emoji characters available on Apple devices later this year. Al-Humedi saw the new emoji for the first time Monday night when a friend sent her a message linking to a BuzzFeed article. Al-Humedi told CNN on Tuesday that she's really happy with how it looks.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture said on Tuesday an 11-year-old cow in Alabama tested positive for bovine spongiform encephalopathy, commonly known as mad cow disease, after exhibiting clinical signs at an Alabama livestock market. The USDA said in a press release the cow tested positive for the atypical L type of BSE. Atypical BSE can arise spontaneously in cattle herds, usually in animals 8 years old or older. The USDA said following delivery to the livestock market, the cow later died at that location, damaging more than a dozen homes in Nevada and forcing residents from communities on the outskirts of Yosemite National Park in California. Authorities said Tuesday tall grass from a deluge of winter rains is fueling wildfires throughout the western United States. Yosemite remains open to visitors. Flames, though, threaten more than 300 homes and buildings in mountain communities southwest of the park, clearing out the small town of Mariposa. The fire has been burning since Sunday. Officials said it also puts at risk power lines providing electricity to the park and has closed roads traveled by tourists. Guatemala's Volcán de Fuego rumbled to life earlier this month, and social media has been erupting with close-up photos and videos of the active volcano. Brad Guay, 22, was visiting Guatemala from Hoboken, New Jersey on July 9th when he woke up to, quote, "the ground under my tent shaking and a series of low rumbles punctuated by occasional louder explosions." Camping on another volcano called Acatenango, which is about 1.5 miles away, when the Volcán de Fuego began erupting.
Forecasters said more than 800,000 residents in the U.S. West were told to be ready to evacuate on Tuesday as windy, dry conditions threatened to stoke wildfires. The National Weather Service said in an advisory that a red flag warning was issued for southern Oregon, northern California, and northern Nevada as 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts and humidity hovering around 10% were seen. The service said strong winds could rapidly push fire into close proximity of local communities Tuesday afternoon and evening. Heed any evacuation orders. React quickly. You may not have much time to leave. More than 6 fires have started up over the last 2 days in California, including the Detweiler fire, which forced some residents in Mariposa County to evacuate on Monday.
Has flooded Istanbul, Turkey, causing mayhem for morning commuters. The storm started in the early hours on Tuesday, July 18th, and by the morning rush hour, the city had ground to a halt. Over 240 pounds of rain reportedly dumped on certain parts of Istanbul. These pictures show the extent of the water on the roads, forcing some drivers out of their cars. And this footage of commuters watching the train lines fill with water gives an idea to the extent of unusual rainfall the city is experiencing. Many buildings and offices are also flooded with water. Istanbul has a population of 15 million, but according to the president of the Disaster and Emergency Management Authority, there have been no reports of casualties as yet. Experts have predicted the rain could continue to fall until Wednesday.
On August 21st of this year, the moon will pass directly in front of the sun and create a total solar eclipse that will be visible in the lower 48 U.S. states. This is the first total solar eclipse since 1979, and it's been predicted that masses of people will travel to rural areas to get a better view. In the 1970s, almost 100,000 people traveled to the Rocky Mountains Teton Range in Idaho to see the total solar eclipse. Scientists and astrology enthusiasts are curious to see how many people will go to the 70-mile arc where they can best view the sun's corona all around the dark
Scientists are
disk of
picking
the
up
moon.
some strange signals coming from space, but they don't think aliens are to blame. Yet. In May, a telescope in Puerto Rico picked up radio signals coming from a red dwarf star just 11 light years from Earth. Last week, the director of the Planetary Habitability Laboratory at the University of Puerto Rico released a statement explaining the three leading theories on what's causing the signals. Abel Mendez said they could be caused by emissions similar to solar flares from the red dwarf, emissions from a different object in the red dwarf's field of view, or from one of our own satellites. Mendez pointed out flaws in all three theories, but he still isn't ready to start considering aliens. Astronomers plan to gather more data on the red dwarf within the week. Mendez said, quote, "I have a pina colada ready to celebrate if the signals result to be astronomical in nature."
Turkey announced a new school curriculum on Tuesday that excludes Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, feeding opposition fears that President Tayyip Erdogan is subverting the republic's secular foundations. The chairman of a teachers' union described the changes as a huge step in the wrong direction for Turkey's schools and an attempt to avoid raising generations who ask questions. Education Minister İsmet Yilmaz said the main elements of evolution already underpinned the science curriculum, but there would be no mention of Darwin's landmark theory until university.
They're monitoring the only border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, following deadly attacks by Daesh in the northern Sinai next door.
The Gaza Strip's authorities are responsible for the safety of the border. They consider Egypt's national security as Palestine's national security.
Hamas has started clearing a new buffer zone along the Gaza-Egypt border. It's a 12-kilometer-long, 100-meter-wide, closed military zone. It's meant to reassure Cairo that Hamas is fighting the movement of militants and weapons across the border. The security zone is part of an effort to ease a crippling blockade of the Strip by Israel, one that's been compounded by Egypt's decision in 2007 to close its Rafah border crossing with Gaza. The security zone by Hamas is designed to build trust.
It's a message to our Egyptian brothers that we spare no effort to maintain the stability of this area, and we don't accept that it acts as a threat to the Egyptian security. We always maintain this.
But it has not been welcomed by people who feel they're being moved off their land to please others.
What the government is doing here is a very big oppression. To satisfy the Egyptians, non-Egyptians and other people, they level people's lands. I, my father and grandfather have been on this land for 150 years.
As part of the security agreement, Egypt is allowing fuel trucks to cross into Gaza to ease the electricity crisis in the Palestinian territory. The hope is the added border controls will lead to more fuel deliveries. Chelsea Carter, TRT World.
For a third day in the street nearest the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Palestinians protested and they prayed. They're refusing to go through metal detectors positioned at the entrance to the compound, a measure they see as an occupying force infringing on a holy site. Inside the old city, the mosque's director insisted there would be no backing down and called for wider Muslim solidarity.
Because of the internal fighting in the Arab and Muslim world, it was an opportunity for Israel to put these gates in and to change the reality on the ground. But we always rely on the position of the Arab street. People everywhere are against this.
In Gaza, military wings of various political factions held a joint news conference, a spokesman issuing this warning.
Al-Aqsa is going through an unprecedented phase of vicious campaign by the occupation. We warn them that we will take strong action to defend our rights, and we will not allow the Zionist enemy to violate our rights and sacred houses of worship. The Israeli occupation wants to turn the Aqsa compound into a military barracks to undermine the heritage of the third holiest site in Islam.
The Israeli government says the detectors are merely a security measure following the attack on Friday that killed 2 Israeli security forces members. and it insists there will be no changes to the status quo, under which the Jordanian-backed Islamic Waqf Authority runs the compound and where Jewish prayer is prevented in its grounds. But Palestinians reject those assurances. In two separate resolutions within the last year, UNESCO accused Israel of escalating aggressions against mosque officials and failing to stop excavations and other practices in and around the Old City, which are illegal under international law.
For Palestinians in East Jerusalem, this kind of heavy security presence is nothing new, but what they say is new is not having what they say is their right, unfettered access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they say until they get that, this is where they'll pray and this is where they'll protest. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
The Trump administration has just unveiled new economic sanctions against Iran over its ballistic missile program and for contributing to regional tensions, one day after warning Tehran that it was not following the spirit of its nuclear agreement with world powers. The US says Iran's continued malign activities outside the nuclear issue undermine positive contributions to peace and security. Washington has slapped sanctions on 18 Iranian entities and individuals linked to Iran's ballistic missile program and other non-nuclear activities. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif earlier criticized the US over the nuclear deal, saying the Trump and Obama administrations have failed to live up to their side of the bargain.
We have given the mandate to the IAEA, actually the agreement has given the mandate to the IAEA to verify our compliance, and it has verified every time that Iran has complied. Iran, in our view, and in the view of the IAEA, built trust by implementing its side of the bargain. Unfortunately, the United States didn't. So it creates the impression in Iran that the United States' hostility towards Iran will never end.
This letter to refugees could be the start of a new life. It invites them to an interview, the first stage of a process which, under a deal between Australia and the United States, could see them resettled in the US.
Of course I'm happy, everyone is happy for that. I mean, like all of our friends, the refugees. Why? Because we want a safe place, freedom.
But not all have had interview invitations. Many refugees have heard nothing and are sceptical about the deal.
I still believe that this interview that's happening now, currently in Port Moresby, is entertainment, that they want to waste more time to keep us here.
9 months after being agreed by Barack Obama and 6 months after Donald Trump reluctantly agreed to honour it, there's still confusion over the Australia-US refugee deal. The deal relates to refugees who mostly in 2013 tried to get to Australia by boat, but when they landed, Australia immediately deported them. It sent men to Manus Island in Papua New Guinea and families to the tiny island nation of Nauru. Australia said it would never accept them, that their best hope was a new life in those Pacific countries. These refugees have tried to live one. They're living in a hostel in Papua New Guinea's capital. But most of those who have tried to work in Port Moresby say they've stopped because of bullying at work, violent attacks on the street, and ongoing mental health problems caused by 4 years in a remote refugee prison.
I cannot do plan for myself now, like the small kids. 2-3 years, I want someone help me.
With virtually no refugees successfully resettled in the Pacific, the US agreed it would resettle some of those who passed its security checks, apparently in exchange for Australia taking refugees from camps in Central America. Most refugees sent to Papua New Guinea are still on Manus Island, where Al Jazeera is not allowed to go. Our media visas to cover Papua New Guinea's election came with a specific condition: we were not to travel to Manus province without asking for and receiving the express permission of the acting chief migration officer.
People in Papua New Guinea's government say that email isn't enough. They want a physical letter. So here it is. I'm going to hand deliver it now.
Weeks on, and despite following up on it, that letter's had no response. These refugees are still waiting too, while Australia's government declined to answer questions about their futures or the deal with the US. We are not, a spokeswoman said, going to provide an ongoing commentary in regards to this process. Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, Port Moresby.
Researchers have recently conducted a study that suggests a cosmic catastrophe would have to be extremely bad for it to destroy life on Earth. Joshua Wynn, a Princeton-based exoplanets expert, stated, "They've taken a grand question, how resilient is life, and turned it into a well-posed calculation by focusing on the energy required to boil Earth's oceans. It's an awful lot of energy. They do not believe an average asteroid would heat up the planet enough to boil through all of Earth's water."
A man who prosecutors say planted a bomb outside a small-town Colorado police station to avenge a friend's murder nearly half a century ago pleaded guilty on Tuesday to federal charges that could send him to prison for the rest of his life. 65-year-old David Michael Ansbury pleaded guilty in U.S. District Court in Denver to attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction in connection with the botched bombing of the Nederland Colorado police station. According to a memorandum prosecutors filed before the hearing, Ansbury belonged to a nomadic group of hippies called Serenity, Tranquility and Peace, or STP. One of STP's members, Guy Goffner, was killed in the summer of 1971. The Netherlands town marshal, Renner Forbes, eventually confessed to killing Goffner and was convicted for that crime in 1998.
This is U3 camp, one of 6 providing shelter for around 73,000 people in this area of Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq. All fled the fighting in and around Mosul. There is no electricity here. That means no fans, no air conditioners. The summer heat is intense and threatening lives. Nora is a volunteer nurse making her daily round.
The most difficult cases are the newborns. They are suffering in the heat, and a lot of children are getting dehydrated. The heat is so harsh.
In this tent, we meet Zahadia, her daughter Farah, and granddaughter Ruqayya, who was born in the camp a month ago.
We had to take her to hospital. She had a bladder infection and she was screaming. The doctors told us she got the infection because of the heat. We are still worried when her temperature rises.
Children cool themselves under taps at one of the water stations. Ice is delivered twice a week for free, but people have to pay if they want it brought to the camp every day. Families shelter in the shade as the temperature rises in the early afternoon.
Temperatures now are regularly hitting around 50 degrees, and that means the life for 7,000 or so people living in this camp in these flimsy tents, it's almost unbearable. Now, the UN say the reason why it's taken so long for electricity to be supplied here so they can get coolers inside these tents is because of lack of financial resources. They also say there have been complications in trying to link up with the local electricity grid because of the conflict.
Many areas are without electricity in and around Mosul because of damage caused by the fighting. The UN says that it needs at least another $500 million to meet the humanitarian needs of the approximately 3.5 million people forced to flee fighting in Iraq.
Because of the extensive heat and the high temperature and the people lack of electricity, they are suffering from hypotension, dizziness, heat stroke. Every day we are receiving a lot of patients complaining of these things.
This baby was born in the camp hours before we arrived. Many here are afraid to be interviewed because of ISIL sleeper cells where they used to live. The UN says it's hopeful electricity will be supplied to this camp soon. Many Iraqis have nothing in Mosul to return to because their homes have been destroyed, so they have no choice but to endure the summer heat here and risk their health. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera, Northern Iraq.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has met his Palestinian counterpart Mahmoud Abbas. After a welcoming ceremony, the two leaders held talks and exchanged views on their bilateral relationship, the Middle East peace process, and other issues of common concern. President Xi said China and Palestine have a long friendship and have maintained high-level contact over the years. He said China would continue to promote communication and cooperation with Palestine in various fields. President Abbas thanked China for its support with its own domestic issues. He added that his country will adhere to the One China principle. The two sides signed a range of agreements following the president's meeting.